Welcome to the Sports Science Dudes. I am your host, Dr. Jose Antonio, with my co-host, Dr. Anthony Ricci. If you're a first-time listener, hit the subscribe button and like this show. Our special guest today is Charles Stull. But before we get to Charles, let's talk about the ISSN conference June 15 to 17 at Fort Lauderdale Beach. It's at the Westin Fort Lauderdale Beach Resort. So if you love sports nutrition, go to issn.net and register for this super fun conference. I'll be there. Tony will be there, and Charles will be there.
You there too?
We're all there. So let's tell you a little bit about Charles Hu Stull. He joined the Ultimate Fighting Championship Performance Institute as the performance nutrition manager in 2018. Prior to working at the UFCPI, Charles was a sports dietitian for the University of California, Los Angeles athletics program. Over the past 5+ years as a sports dietitian, Charles has worked with combat sports athletes such as in MMA, Muay Thai, and boxing, as well as athletes in professional organizations such as the NFL, LPGA, and USOPC. And I didn't know this about Charles, but he was a Division I swimmer at my alma mater, the American University.
There you go.
And he also carries a seasoned Muay Thai career with over 15 years of competitive experience. So welcome to the Sports Science Dudes, Charles. And because we have gone to the same university, I need to know how you found the American University, because really the only people who know about it are East Coast people, and even that, not even East Coast, Northeast Coast people.
That's
So,
right.
so how did you find it?
So I was born and raised in Hong Kong, so complete opposite side of the world. So that's even farther than the Northeast Coast. And funny story is I was looking for universities to apply to, and I typed American University instead of American Universities.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh, I guess they only have one. I have to apply.
There was only one university.
I guess there's only one.
Oh my God. Well, at least you didn't end up somewhere, great, like in the Bronx or something,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, back when Jose and I were young, maybe there was one university, but definitely not in your days.
So you literally, that's all you applied to?
No, I figured the mistakes of my ways after a couple additional searches, but I mean, after looking at it, beautiful campus, amazing location, and it had a large international student community. Obviously, that was important to me, being an international student. So yeah, ended up going there.
Wow, that is amazing. Yeah. I don't meet many people who graduated from American University. Because I grew up in that area. But after graduation, I got a biology degree. I realized, what, I need to go somewhere else because I'm a fan of hot weather. And eventually ended up in Texas, then now Florida. So I'm a permanent resident here, thank God. Got Tony down here too. Tony's now
Paradise.
He's a full-fledged Floridian. So anyhow, hey, I know, Tony, you have like a whole string of questions for Charles, as do I. So I will let you take over.
Yeah, well, let's start it off, Charles. Definitely we want to highlight some of the great work, but just tell us, so you went to American University, you go on, get your RD, and then what was the process before for you to get into UFCPI and on that nutrition team? So what preceded that and how'd that come about?
Yeah. So when I lived in LA for a while, and back then I was just training Muay Thai, fighting in Muay Thai, and had a string of challenging weight cuts. And man, I was just kind of lost and trying to find my way. And there had to be a better way of doing this. And that's actually
sorry to interrupt. What weight were you trying to cut to?
So I'm 6'4", and I was walking around at 160 pounds. So I would compete at 154. And I thought that I had to be 154 pounds because that's the weight class, right? The concept of acute weight cutting and the manipulation of non-essential body mass, completely foreign to me. So I just train and train and train. I'm talking, 3 hours of actual pad work, sparring, clinching, and then I would do additional road work I mean, I was running like 8-9 miles a day, just withering my body down to try and to get down a weight. And there just had to be a better way of doing this. And because of that, I kind of stumbled upon dietetics. And that kind of sparked the journey, so to speak, with sports nutrition for me. And I was fortunate to, be in LA, and I got a, internship position at UCLA Athletics. And obviously I didn't mess it up too bad because they ended up hiring me, and got a lot of experience about the logistics side and the operational side of nutrition and its practice in a sports setting. And, through conferences and networking, I ran into Clint Wattenberg, who's the director of the UFCPI nutrition program here in Las Vegas. And we actually bonded over a metabolic cart at a conference. And
not a beer, a metabolic cart.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, they gave me an opportunity I couldn't turn up, and the rest has been history.
Wait, where did you do your RD?
So I did my master's, and it was a coordinated program through Cal State LA. So it was in LA, which is hence the proximity to UCLA.
Okay. Now I have a question which is a little off topic, Tony, before you get to yours.
Yeah.
In the fight sports, or actually in any sport, I think there's a huge disconnect between what RDs are taught and what happens in the real world. And in fact, it's like a gulf that's as wide as the Grand Canyon. Could you address how you dealt with that as an athlete going through the RD program, thinking, well, wait a minute, this isn't what athletes do. I think the American College of Sports Medicine has this idea that, well, in order to do safe weight loss, it's got to be 1 to 2 pounds a week. And I'm thinking, holy crap, 1 to 2 pounds a week? The weight cut will be like a year.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
I think I had a slight advantage heading into the sort of RD program because I had come from, I would argue, a hard sciences background. And I was able to sort of interrogate what was being taught with what limited literature was already out there. And I think it's become a core component of what, has made me successful in my practice. Is you also have to understand the sport culture. And you got to talk to people who are on the ground in the field, and that's actually how my pursuit, so to speak, of more knowledge is how Jeff Rothschild, who's actually a big mentor of mine, introduced me to the ISSN, and that's how I networked with Tony, and that's how I networked with Chris Algieri, Corey Peacock, and Dr. Douglas Coleman. Those are actually guys who really guided me along the acute weight loss route, the combat sports nutrition route. And I say this, but dietetics is one thing, sports dietetics is another, and then an even more nuanced niche is combat sports nutrition. So you got to take everything that you get exposed to in school with a grain of salt, and keep that intuition to always look at literature and what's being published, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, and there's still a foundation there, right? You learn the bioenergetics, you learn various pathways and how how the energy is expended, and that comes of great value. But to your point, when you get into the amalgamation or marriage, if you will, of being in the field, the application and the study is crucial. I don't think that leaving one behind works well, or I don't know if you can actually grasp it and do it as effectively as you are now, right? With the absence of all three being brought together.
And Jose, you'll love this. So I was always the troll in my grad school RD program.
I believe it.
I'd be the guy in class with my 100-gram protein shake while they were talking about 0.8 grams per kilo. I'm like, well, shit, I guess I'm gonna get kidney disease. So that was, for context, I was that student.
It's fun. I feel like everyone at ISSN has a similar story.
It's like,
they were the one person who kept questioning sort of the zeitgeist of the time. And I remember when I was an undergrad at AU, I took my first nutrition class, and it was in 1983. And I remember my nutrition professor saying that, all these athletes eating high protein diets, it's going to be bad for their kidneys. And I'm just a dumb undergrad, and I'm thinking, wait a minute. I know a lot of guys who eat a lot of protein, mostly bodybuilders at the time, because my uncle was a bodybuilder. And it's just so weird that from 1983 to now, people are still saying it. It's just insane. It's just insane.
It's insane. It's insane.
Well, I guess this too, what they're also saying before we hit next topic is not only is it damaging the kidneys, it's sitting in our digestive tract for 3 years. How about that one? That's have you heard that one yet, Charles?
I saw that one circulating around. Also,
so basically, you drank 100-gram whey protein shake. That's probably 6 years in your digestive tract at 100 grams.
It's probably still there now.
I know, it's crazy. So let me ask you this. Tell us a little bit about when you get there, specifically, not the UFCPI itself, but the nutrition division. Do you guys, if you could categorize the mission of the nutrition team, obviously it falls under the broader category of augmenting and advancing performance, right? But the nutrition team itself, you guys, what was the vision, the mission that was coming together when you got there with Clint and the team?
Yeah, so the mission has evolved through the years. The PI had come to fruition in 2017, and I joined in 2018. At that time, it was still in the kind of data gathering phase, I would say. So they're like, okay, what do our athletes actually do, and how do we influence its quote unquote evolution? It's changed leaps and bounds from that, where we actually have like tangible objectives. And it's funny that I'm sitting literally behind our VMOS, but
There you go.
I can go into a little more detail as to the specifics, but our three kind of core tenets right now is improving our athletes' metabolic health, so to speak, and that's through sustainable weight descent and regaining strategies through the off season. We have a large emphasis on brain health and keeping our athletes resilient through their careers, but also after. And of course, sustainable weight making practices. So those are really our three core pillars right now, our mission.
When you're talking about brain health, what would be the sports supplement strategies that would be used by you guys? And also, are there any specific dietary strategies? Because I'm more familiar with the supplement stuff, but would it be both?
It's most certainly both, and it's also a lifestyle thing. For starters, I think you have to approach a resiliency model, which is that 52 week a year model of fostering resiliency. Basically, don't go into competition micronutrient deprived.
Right.
Being professional about one's weight descent trajectory. If you're creating a massive calorie deficit on 1,000 calories a day and you're doing sparring practice, well, guess what? Your injury risk and the cumulative blows you're going to receive is going to be much higher than you're in a more nourished and neurologically functional state, right? And the same application with the dehydration process, right? If you have a massive weight cut, you will be compromised the next day, and you're reducing your probability of success. So that's the resiliency pre-fight piece. And let's say post-fight, there are, of course, the supplementary strategies. We're big advocates of creatine all year round, if possible. You probably do have to do higher doses of curcumins, omega-3s, as well as, like I said, making sure your micronutrients are adequate. But we also know that concussions can have an immense impact on circadian rhythms and impact sleep quality. So there's a whole behavioral as well as tactical component to sleep and recovery that we're also managing and influencing post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic brain injury.
And I'm glad people are hearing this, because I do think, and I've known you for a long while and the guys over there, and I know how hard you work, the time, the effort. and you put in. And this elucidates some of the global strategies that you've developed. This isn't just, hey, let's get a bunch of guys in to make weight safely. No, you're looking at the overall health, the pre, the post, the long-term strategies, the post strategies. And that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort in order to get the data and formulate this approach. And so it leads me to a question. Once you aggregated some of the data, Charles, what did you guys find? In better words, was it, hey, 20% of everybody attempting to make weight is missing on an annual basis? Or did we have any numbers on that? Did you guys get numbers and then say, all right, this is what's got to be remedied, strictly as it pertains to missing weight first, as opposed to health?
Sure. So if we're talking about weight making itself, I believe actually Duncan had brought this up, but there was a significant 67% reduction in weight misses.
You brought it down, yeah.
And then COVID happened.
Okay.
and then our numbers went. Actually, there was more weight misses than ever, but that was more to do with the fact that there was a lot of late notice fights, a lot of abbreviated fight camps because training partners got sick, or travel was impacted because of visa issues, you name it. Like every possible thing that could make a weight descent and maximizing the probability of success for weight making went wrong with COVID. To the extent that these are things that no one can see on the outside, but a lot of times if there was potentially, let's say, a false positive and the whole team got quarantined, and you let's say you were not positive but you had to make weight in a quarantined room, could you imagine the challenges that you had to overcome to make weight without the resources that you may need to be successful? Psychologically too, you have to dig into the trenches of your psyche to push yourself through an acute weight cut. That's especially a challenging one. If you don't even know if you're fighting, what's your why? Right. So these are all the challenges that we had to overcome during COVID, and for sure our numbers, the weight misses increased because of that. But now that things have kind of normalized, we're back on par with our 67% reduction in weight misses. But I'd say the largest intangible that we can't quantify per se is just being on the other side, so to speak. I can say that we've had a massive impact on the co-mains and main events of those pay-per-views where, there's a lot on the line for these guys to safely and sustainably make weight. And we've made incredible impact on making sure that these cards get to the finish line, even though statistically, I can't prove that offhand.
Well, I think, and Jose and I are big fans, and it's been quiet in a positive way, right? We haven't had too many misses of late. So we definitely see it, and the numbers are there for you, which I mean, again, everyone, 67%. I mean, think about that in total decline. It's fantastic, and that shows, the efforts and just what has been put into this and how effective the team is.
Absolutely.
Well, how about, probably the most notorious weight cut that missed was Chimaev. I mean, he missed by, correct me if I'm wrong, but something like 7 or 8 pounds. And you guys, this is your field. And as just a fan watching, it seems like a really big miss. So a lot of things had to go wrong. So without getting into specifics about what happened per se with Chimaev, what are some of the things that might have been missed, if you're going to miss weight by that much?
100%. So I think you have to look at what can go wrong in terms of an acute weight cut. And in his situation, we don't have as many eyes on him because at the end of the day, our athletes are independent entities.
Right.
They can utilize us if they'd like to, or they may not. In that situation, we were not consulted nor utilized during the fight week. So we actually had no eyes on that particular case. But I think what can go wrong in terms of an acute weight cut is not having an action plan. And the variables that one has to control, or at least you should be aware of that has a direct impact on weight making success, you can make it as complicated as as you can possibly imagine. You can even think about what's the humidity level in the room that I'm sleeping in, because I'm trying to maximize the amount of respiratory losses. You can get that nuanced. And for 90% of the athletes that are making weight, are those little details as essential? Not really. Especially with the paper that we all came out with, right? Our athletes tend to actually cut less weight than people thought.
Yep.
But for the outliers, every gram is essential, right? Every little nuanced thing is essential. And another big challenge with the acute weight making process nowadays is the under preparation component. Not even from a weight descent piece about coming in at a certain percentage, but there are a whole plethora of things that one can do in the lead up to fight week that actually prepares the body for the acute weight process. And that big thing is actually heat acclimation and exposure, because it's not just the cardiac and sweat rate changes that you can elicit, but it's also the psychological piece. Mm-hmm. If you've had a challenging weight cut, there is nothing that sets you up for another more challenging one if you don't face the problem, so to speak, and you kind of push it to the wayside. The repeat exposures to things that were quote unquote traumatic at the time, we call it weight cut PTSD, is one of the better ways in preparing your body physically, psychologically for the acute weight cut process. And that's perhaps an underutilized tactic even to this day.
Don't you guys think it's odd that there wouldn't be an actual plan for a weight cut? That's sort of like not having a plan to train. What are we doing today? Well, whatever. Let's just go into the gym and let's talk to Tony. I mean, that just seems, as a professional athlete, that just seems odd, right?
Well, for starters, look at this population. We have fighters,
Yeah.
There's fighters and there's athletes, right? And oftentimes we have fighters. And also each event, each location can have its own challenges, its own difficulties. And I don't think all athletes can necessarily quantify or objectively look at, okay, well, I have a fight week in Rio. Okay, the humidity level is going to be 80 to 90%. Okay, I've been used to training in heat tolerance at, sea level at 30% humidity at this temperature. Okay, well, now when I'm training in this high humidity level, my evaporative cooling is less efficient. My risk for heat stress is increased. I might have to change my heat exposure durations to accommodate for this. These are things that I don't think our athletes or even their performance team around them necessarily can quantify. And also there's different variables, things can go wrong, like the hotel water heater blows up. Right. No one can use a bath for this weight cut. Things go wrong. And I think having the perfectionist mindset of this weight cut will be the best weight cut of my life. Great. You can try and you can aim for that, but man, have the psychological resiliency to overcome when things don't go right. I think that's another massive component of the acute weight cut process.
And that's a wonderful point, because there are so many variables that impact it, and at times many of them inexplicable, right? You have standardized procedures, and sometimes they've been quite effective. And to your point, sweat rates or heat loss can be muted, or it can vary according to altitude, climate, or a host of other reasons that we don't always see within the athlete's personal life or sleep or anything along those lines. So, a systematic approach is wonderful, but to your point, even that, we have to be able to move left and move right and keep the athlete calm at given points. I think one of the challenges, MMA is really hard in a sense where sometimes, the people have exposure to 3 or 4 different coaches from different disciplines that have used to been cutting weight in different ways. And even if they have someone that they're relying on doing good work to help in the weight cut, their nutrition programming, there's 4 or 5 other voices in their ear consistently, right? And so it becomes quite challenging. You have a protocol, you have a method, you want to go through with this, but I can't tell you what I've been through when I used to do this all the time. Write it out, put it on paper. Here's what we do. Here's where we go. And all they got to do is talk to one other fighter, and you can rip that piece of paper up really fast.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You guys, couple of things too, I asked Charles, and Joey, just jump in, anything with any questions. So once you got the data, if you could, it's very difficult to do because you just alluded to the fact that it varies from athlete to athlete, camp to camp. But was there anything that you saw that was urgent, if you will? Or what was the most notable practice that you think had to be changed immediately, Charles? Was there anything going on, and it's hard amongst the entire roster, but there was anything that you guys came up immediately with based on the data or what's missing or what you were hearing or what people were coming to the Institute with that you said, all right, here's the first thing we got to really try to get through to everyone?
I don't, the paper itself wasn't able, well, we didn't investigate it, so to speak, in the paper, but something that we do track when we interact with any athlete over fight week is their fluid intake in the preparation leading to fight week, as well as manipulation strategies they'll have during fight week. When we first started the fight week program in 2018 or so, there was a much larger prevalence of what's considered a water taper over fight week. And for viewers that don't quite understand this, it's a progressive reduction in fluid intake all the way through the week. So let's say on Monday, I'll have 2 gallons. Tuesday, I'll have 1 gallon. Wednesday, I'll have 1,500 mLs. And on Thursday, I'll just sip on nothing. So keep in mind, if you're looking at that from a grams per mLs per kilo of fluid, you're obviously reaching a threshold quite early on where the athlete is reaching dehydration. In addition to this, you have to think about all the training they're doing, the continued heat exposures they're getting themselves into, all the media obligations that they have to go through, right? So that is just imparting a tremendous strain on the athlete's every physiological system possible, and it makes the recovery post weigh-in all the more challenging. And I've seen a very impactful change in that component of the acute weight making process into a much more sustainable model of staying as nourished as possible up until the acute weight cut, so you can put it all back in, so to speak.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, the less time you spend in really now becomes challenging, right? I mean, but the less time we spend in the fluid deficiency and nutrient deficiency, the better,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Is there any hemodynamic data on, when they start the weight cut, just heart rate, blood pressure, even RMR data, or RER data, respiratory exchange ratio? I think the physiology would be curious because you can't really replicate it in the study. I mean, you're not going to get college kids say, hey, we're going to do a weight cut. It'll be severe. And we're going to measure all this stuff. So I would imagine a lot of this depends on the fighter, their coaches, like, hey, we don't want you touching our fighter, yada, yada. Is that data available at all?
So if you're looking at like a population data, no. I do have individual data where I have enough because while we do the heat acclimation, heat exposures, I'm tracking, believe it or not, cardiac drift, which you would assume is only applicable to aerobic training, but actually the longer the duration of the heat stress, you can actually see that there is cardiac drift and your heart rate actually increases, right?
Wait, you're talking about cardiovascular drift at rest? At rest in a sauna.
Okay. In a sauna. So right, like, okay, well, that's an interesting approach. So I'll collect that on my own. Now that those are N of ones where I'm like looking at, okay, well, for this duration, your cardiac drift is 3%. And that's tolerable with an RPE of this, that, and the other. And then when I can apply that to the acute weight cut setting, whereby I know where I'm starting to deviate off of that trajectory, and my athlete is reaching unsustainable levels of heat exposure where I need to do some cooling or I need to have a rest period, right? So those are all N of ones. I think it would be fascinating, if possible, to, of course, apply a much larger population, but because of how intimate that setting is, and the requirement for you to be reactionary in that time, and a lot of athletes actually don't like to collect data during the acute weight cut process. We give a lot of our athletes Oura rings, but guess what? They don't wear it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So because of that, it's a limited data set, but hey, if there's any viewers out there that would love to do this as their PhD.
Great idea, actually.
Well, when you say N of ones, how many N of ones do you have? Like 10, 50, 100?
At this point, there's probably 30. But yes,
I'm telling you, that's publishable.
That is, I mean, that's a good number.
Yeah, that's actually
We're getting there,
publishable.
Charles.
Hey,
and,
I think
and also alongside that, one also will collect O2 stat data. However, the O2 stat data, I think if you were to review it, I don't think it's as accurate as possible, because how many athletes actually stay in a supine rested position for long enough for you to actually collect good data?
Yeah.
It's a little more challenging on the fly. So a lot of what we're doing on the fly, I argue, wouldn't be quality enough to publish, but you could review the methods and let me know what you think.
Hey, I always say information's information.
Yeah.
At this point, no one really knows. I mean, you're one of the few who actually has this data.
Exactly.
And put it this way, someone has to be the first to put it out. Despite all of the confounders that you might have. I mean, you're right. These athletes may not want to be part of data collection, but hey, those numbers could be super cool. It's because it's something I've thought about, but I'm thinking, who would collect that? I mean, not many people would even have that kind of access. So, Charles, I know grad students who could be happy to write. We just need the data.
and on our front, we need to know what is actually collectible data, like what is actually impactful, right? Because with this the strain in cardiac drift from heat exposure, that was just an inkling that one came up that I was like, I wonder if this is a thing. Oh, it seems to be. Oh, what practice can I have with that data set to influence an acute weight cut itself? But this is why we at the PI are in collaboration with researchers like yourselves, so we can answer as well as direct these data collection opportunities.
Well, imagine though, Charles, if in 4 or 5 years, sorry to cut you off, Tony, that
I'm good.
you will be the guy known to be the first to look at cardiovascular drift and its importance in a weight cut. Everyone's like, hey, no one looked at it before until Charles did. So
Charles
just something to think about.
It's that old saying, Charles' work is so far ahead of his time, he doesn't even have to start it yet, right? But let me just quickly, Charles, to Dr. Ray's point on all of this, can you, in case anyone wasn't sure exactly what the drift means, can you just elucidate what we mean by cardiac drift and what just quickly, some of the, are we looking at that drift due to just sympathetic activation, loss of plasma volume, decreased stroke volume as a result, or what are some of the factors there?
Yeah. So with cardiac, so there's let me see if I can do this without butchering it. There's a limited cardiac output during heat exposure, and there's also a strain on venous return, and that is mitigated by like muscle pump or training under heat conditions. But eventually there is an increased strain over time as one's plasma volume decreases, and as a result, the heart has to work harder and heart rate increases over time. I think that's a simple
perfect summary. Yeah. Just in case anybody wasn't sure where we were going with that. And our those who listen in are quite knowledgeable, but we also have some young aspiring, weight cut coaches or performance coaches that really, I think, would benefit from this. And it's really neat, just the very fact what you look into. It's easy to critique the information one is deriving, but the question itself is profound and leads us in directions that we need to go inevitably. That's why I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a couple other things too, because give us a little idea. So this is fun. I've been with you on this, right? And Joey, I got to tell you, it ain't easy. Bless these guys. So Charles gets off the plane for the fight week. Anybody wants to go to school, be an RD, maybe one day work their way up to UFCPI Mexico, Shanghai, or who knows where we're going next. I love the idea of UFCPI Florida. I don't know why that sounds so good, but what happens? Charles gets off that plane, and what's going on from there? From the time he gets in, let's say you just got back from where? Australia. Yeah. So how'd that run for you? What is he doing?
Sure. I mean, the logistics and operational component happens weeks and weeks and weeks ahead of a fight week event, and a large component that is perhaps underrepresented about the role of, dietetics is actually the food service component, which I know doesn't sound sexy, but guess what? You got to feed the athletes.
Exactly.
So we obviously have a culinary team that we coordinate with, and our performance chef will and myself will communicate with the hotels and go over all the logistics, temperature control of all the athletes' fridges, right? What are the cooking? Because we're a large organization now, we need an industrial kitchen. So all the components that are necessary there, and then produce sourcing. Obviously in Australia it's easy, but when we did events in China, okay, well, do we have to be concerned about adulterated meat products? Do we have to import everything? Do we have to make sure that it's sourced from vendors that we can backtrack if there's ever an issue? These are all the logistics and things that no one sees, but is happening way, way, way before a fight week. And then planning and the logistics of how to get there. We actually travel with all of our oral rehydration solutions, all of our fight week supplements, all of our weight cut supplies, sweet sweat, thermal sheets, you name it. We travel with everything.
So that doesn't come in advance. Chef,
no.
You yourself are bringing
the classic thing is the dietitians and the chefs with like 6 suitcases like lugging through the airports, right? And so that happens in the weekend even before fight week begins, and then it's just a mad dash of preparation, onboarding of athletes who we may not have ever met before or interacted with, and those that we have been working with. There's like a fiber load, so to speak, the week prior, things to prepare the gut, and then the fiber depletion that comes the week after during fight week. These are all protocols that we are continually providing the athletes with in preparation for the fight week before they even arrive. So it's like managing a whole plethora of things, and then an athlete fueling plan is not effective if you don't understand an athlete's media and sleep and training schedule.
That's right.
Simple as that. So these are all the things, and each athlete's going to have a different schedule. For instance, I think that this is a fascinating case, but and it's something to be aware of with practitioners who are working with Muslim athletes, but their traditional sleep-wake cycle is completely different than someone who's not, because they do prayers. They have to do fajr, which is like a prayer at 4:30 a.m. right? But guess what? That impacts your sleep-wake cycle, and impacts the amount of weight you might float through the night.
Great
and
point.
It certainly impacts the acute weight cut process, because if you didn't factor that in, you will lose an important touch point with that athlete, or it'll mess up your calculations. One way or another, it will impact the athlete. So you have to manage all these cases in conjunction, with the rest of the card, as well as managing and mastering the logistical component. So it's a lot.
I've seen what you do, and I've seen it, and I've seen the complexities. I've seen everything. People think you go there, you fly in, and you hand out a few drinks, right? And hand out a couple. What you are managing and the moving pieces are incredible, and I'm glad that everyone that'll listen in on this is really hearing it. Because you're doing what you all do is far more comprehensive than I think what anyone had thought you all do in preparation for each fight.
100%, and 40 plus events a year. So The moment
Right.
you touch down, it's another fight week. So luckily we have a large enough team that we can rotate these events. So there's a little bit of recovery, there's a little bit of recoup, and there's a little bit of logistics planning that can happen. But once the trains are rolling, it's rolling.
Yeah.
So do you guys charter a flight, or are you flying commercial with all this stuff?
We fly commercial, but
With all the, so it's you and the whole team all flying commercial with God knows what you're packing.
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah.
That would be a nightmare.
Oh,
Well,
it
I mean,
is.
like,
Can you imagine like baggage getting lost and then it's like, oh, all our ORS is gone. Okay, great. Now what do we do? All right, well, be flexible.
Wow, I can't even, I think we need to talk to Elon and see if we can get a UFCPI nutrition rocket. And you guys have your own little flight. How's that sound?
I'm all for it. I'm all for it.
that is crazy.
I can't imagine lugging along all that stuff on commercial.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I
it's-
have a question, Charles, based on when you competed in Muay Thai for over a decade, right?
Oh yeah.
So from the time you competed to basically now, what did you not do during your competition time that you're like, shit, I wish I'd known this. I would have been a better fighter at the time, that, you know, you've learned over the years.
Everything. I kid you not. I thought that undue suffering, under recovery, poor sleep,
Made you tough.
and it was a requirement. It was the path. It was like there was no negotiable. You had to feel like absolute shit, and that was just how it was. And I remember like trying to periodize my 1,200 calorie diet for 3 months and trying to say,
Oh
well,
my God.
if I like do a gram of rice here, am I over? Oh, I guess I got to go for a run. You know, it's like that was the mental approach. And obviously with experience and understanding, one completely changed that component. But I was the guy that was under recovered, always injured, on a water taper, running into plastics 3 days before weigh-ins. That was me. Like that, I was that guy. And fortunately, I mean, I wouldn't change a thing, because if I didn't do everything wrong,
Right.
I wouldn't know how to do things less
So-
wrong.
There had to be that austerity, that difficulty. It sort of reminds me, I don't know, Tony, going back, I remember looking at old black belt magazines. I think there was Karate Illustrated, and they would have these Japanese guys in a gi. They'd be under a cold waterfall doing their forms and stuff. And you got to suffer if you want to be a great martial artist. I'm like, there's no way I'm getting under a waterfall.
Do that.
Or like stepping in snow, doing, you know, some goofy kata that they used to do back then. But I mean, that obviously you learn that from someone. I mean, someone told you this is the way you do it. And now looking back, you're like, God, what a dumbass.
Well, yeah, it's the sporting culture. I mean, and dare I say, it's a bit of a tough guy mentality too. But at the same time, look, it's still one of the most immensely challenging sports there is out there. And for sure, I'm a little biased. Like, I think combat sports, there's nothing like it. However, why waste your resources, your limited willpower on stupid things
Exactly.
when you can dedicate that resiliency, that mental fortitude towards winning the rounds when it counts, or, you know, overcoming the challenges of X, Y, and Z that are actually of some form of performance benefit, rather than being the idiot that, you know, I was.
Well, and many were. But, you know, and to your point, guys, you're spot on. If you're in a special operations group, you're going to go without food, and you're going to go without sleep. And then you have to be trained to perform at a high level in the absence of the optimal resources. But when you're putting this on the line, right? Big money, and you lose your championship because you might have that mentality, and your salary goes down to a third of what it was in your subsequent title bouts, your subsequent fights, as opposed to defending your title. I mean, you know, we should never tempt physiology, optimize it. And I think that's great, because you guys have really helped that mentality. As a group, the UFCPI, I think, has definitely done that, or I don't think we see 67% decline, right? And we're praising the tough guy mentality. It's tough enough. You
It's
get
tough
cut
enough,
up, you
for
get
sure.
broken up during sparring, right? You got to cut the weight. That in itself is, hey, it's not easy. Don't take it any further.
And something I'll add to that too, Tony, there to this day is still a large, because if you look at population and talent and that like siphoning up to the top, I think
Yeah.
we're missing a massive component of the population that gets burnt out or turned off
Great point.
from combat sports because of this mentality of it having to be super hard. Because realistically, if you're in the lower levels, you're working a part-time job, you're training
Right.
as much as you can.
Great point.
And those lifestyle components are not conducive when you throw in a 1,200 calorie per day, diet, right? And we're missing out on a huge population of athletes that are incredibly talented, but either got burnt out or turned off,
Yes.
or arrived to the professional levels and are so metabolically impaired, so micronutrient deprived, so unresilient that they have a short and unfortunately, uneventful career. And I think influencing the sport from the ground up, from the developmental level all the way up to the professional level, you're going to see more and more talented athletes come into the play because your population that you're pulling from is going to be that much bigger.
Right. Hence the role of the UFCPI itself, right? To try to create the optimal environment and bring up young professional fighters with the proper habits, resources, technology, and strategies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, Tony, last time, I don't think I've ever had a 1,200 calorie day ever in my life. I think our last meal at the Neurosports Conference was well over 1,200. I mean,
Easily over 12. I'm trying to keep each meal under 12, not a day. Charles, you were 6'4", 154. Is that what you're telling us?
that's crazy.
I'd walk around at down at 160, and I'm 6'4".
But that's probably why you're a good swimmer. I mean, you have the wingspan. I mean, you're long, right?
For sure. Which is crazy because when I swam, my optimum, my walk around weight was 210. And then
whoa.
Is that what you weighed?
Yeah, and I would peak at around 190 when it was time. And then it would be crazy because then in the summer I'd go into combat sports, although don't tell the sports coaches that don't. And then I would crash diet down from there to try and make.
Wow. So 190. So obviously you were in distance. You were swimming power and speed, right? I
was a sprinter actually.
Yeah, you had to be. I can't, right? Because you ain't going up to 190 and swimming the 500.
You're young, you're resilient, you're able to push it that way. Once again, to all the young professionals out there or young developmental athletes out there, don't waste your time and resources doing that. Find a much more sustainable approach so you can dedicate the resources to your professional career down the road.
I have more of a crystal ball question. I remember the first UFC, one of the first UFCs I watched was it was tournament style. And I know Hoist Gracie, I think, won the first 2 or 3. And it was the first time people were introduced to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's like, holy crap, this kind of small, spindly kind of guy is beating guys much larger than him using, these odd grappling techniques. So you watch UFC and then you see this evolution where wrestlers start coming in and wrestlers learn how to defend against jiu-jitsu and they start to dominate a bit. But then as the UFC progresses, you actually see strikers come in who are just good at defending against takedowns, like the Chuck Liddells, even though he had a wrestling background. And then we get to this point where you only have really a few dominant grapplers. I mean, most, I guess, from Dagestan, really. And everyone else seems to be focusing on striking and just using grappling more as a defense technique or, a prevention of takedowns. Where do you see the sport evolving? Because, just going back a few months, it was the first time we all saw 2 kickboxers in a title fight, Adesanya and Pereira. I mean, I think that was the first, wasn't it? Where it was really 2.
That level of, just 2 strikers from a very high level kickboxing background. Yeah.
Right.
I think, and Tony, please chime in here too, but I think combat sports, like all forms of combat, it's kind of an arms race, and you're always looking to add tools, and there's always going to be an evolution of how different sports disciplines are utilized and applied, and how it can win the fight. And striking, obviously, like we've seen ups and downs of certain techniques, right? I mean, one moment, Anderson Silva lands a front kick, and then the next day in the gym, everyone's throwing front kicks. And then I forget the athlete, but threw a front kick on Vitor Belfort, and Vitor just
Machida. That was Machida.
But it was on Vitor, and then I believe actually might have been it was a Japanese athlete. Oh well, obviously Lyoto is, but got countered, right? And then okay, there's a new arms race now of the calf kick, and then everyone threw calf kicks, and then guess what? A lot of people broke their shins, right? And then there was a clever, a large component of those athletes, and right now, obviously, we had high pressure Dagestan grappling that seems to be quite prevalent, but then we also saw Volkanovski come up with an amazing, wrestling defense, and
He really did.
Ultimately, and then guess what? Everyone's going to rewatch that and watch those scrambling exchanges, and everyone's grappling is going to get that much better. So who knows how the sport will evolve? I will say, I'm biased because I come from stand-up. I think the fans, maybe it's also a lack of appreciation for grappling right now. But like, I think a lot of people do enjoy watching two athletes, dare I say it, cause traumatic brain injury on one another. So I think that also causes a bias towards some of these strikers, so to speak, getting a path to the title and retaining it, etc. But ultimately, like it is an arms race, so to speak, and I'm just excited to be to be an observer and see how things evolve over time.
Yeah, great answer. I mean, it has moved in and out. I do think, to your point also, though, Charles, the Gen Pop, and that's a substantive portion of the fan base, they understand striking more. Striking is primal. It's about as old as it gets. Usually stand-up allows for more movement, which is important in keeping one's attention span, and again, I'm a huge proponent of the throwing and grappling arts, and it's something that I was just naturally a little bit better at, but nevertheless, I do think striking still is significantly more exciting for the general population and maybe the majority of the UFC fan base. And I'm not asking you to make such a comment, but that's just my guess based upon they do want to see a little bit of leaking and a little bit of blood. Now that happens with ground and pound, but it doesn't happen with a good ground scramble usually, So, nevertheless, I thought a great example was this past fight with Alex and Islam. It just outstanding skills, defense and offense and defense on both ends, and a credit to the sport, its advancement, its strategies. It was wonderful, and the sportsmanship was great. I thought all that was good about the UFC really came out in that fight.
Yeah, I almost, dare I say it, I was almost a bit sad at the overall fan reaction to that. I thought that both warriors deserved so much more love and appreciation. One athlete for risking it all, and one for being brave enough to go for the challenge of going up in weight class. And I think that is literally what martial arts is about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Was that fight. And I don't know if we'll get anything like that in the near future, but I mean, I certainly hope so.
And as do I. Good night for the UFC. Go on, Joey. I'm sorry.
Are you allowed to comment on who you think won the fight? Is that since you're employed?
I'm an unbiased. Yeah, I'm going to play completely unbiased in this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's still waiting for his stuff to come off the flight from Australia. They got a lot of
I actually had a bag. I lost the bag. For real.
What'd you lose?
Just essential oral rehydration. All
Oh,
No, not a problem.
You could get that anywhere, right?
Exactly.
Well, true, but then on the flip side, we have to make sure everything is third-party tested, and then it has to
Yeah,
come
that's
from the
right.
source. We have a batch number. So fortunately, some other members of our team were flying in on the sports medicine side. So shout out to Bobby for saving the day, but he lugged in 7 bags.
Wow, geez, that's insane.
It is. It's crazy. I see what they do, Jose. It's a lot of work, man, and I really appreciate it. Well, maybe Charles, we could close out with just a little bit of, I mean, tell everyone what we found in that paper. I know that Duncan did, but I don't. He discussed it a little bit too, but I think it's also good just to summarize it again, right? And to just tell everyone what I was quite surprised. And it was funny that a few people wrote, I think even on one of Dr. A's posts, oh, I already knew that. Well, considering the UFC didn't know it yet, I don't know how you knew it, but you should have wrote a paper on it, whoever it was.
Yeah, and also just to reiterate, I mean, Tony and I were at Nova Southeastern University, and we appreciate the collaboration with the UFCPI.
Big
I mean,
time.
for us, it's absolutely huge because, well, one, we're fight fans, and two, we're scientists. So I don't know how many scientists who are fight fans, except like just us at Nova Southeastern. so
Yeah,
so we
it's
appreciate
wonderful
it.
for us. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
So for starters, I think this is just the beginning in terms of collaborative opportunities, and I can't wait to see what all of our collective, minds can come up with. And even by briefly talking on this platform, we already came up with some interesting potential
Certainly
new
did.
questions. But with regards to that paper, I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. We have an understanding of norms about what our athletes are cutting and how much they're regaining. And it might be a chicken and the egg where, yeah, we are able to reduce the amount of weight misses because this is what we've been doing.
Exactly.
But on the flip side, it's still immensely important to help the general public also be aware of the fact that our athletes aren't cutting as much weight as they may appear to be, right? I think there's still a glorification of, the hard path, the amount of weight I had to cut, the sacrifice it took. But I think the next component, and I think we're very excited to tackle this, is starting to actually tie in win-loss data.
Yes.
Is it the guy who cut the most weight that regained the most and actually won?
Right.
Or is it the guy who retained their fat-free mass because they didn't have that much weight to cut and they ate more, who regained the most weight actually and then won the fight?
Right.
And these things are actually going to be what I think is the next stage in influencing acute weight cutting, is to understand whether or not there's actually an incentive. And that's just win-loss. Then we can really get into the neuroscience component of what is the actual cost on the central nervous system, reaction speed, etc. And those will actually be, I think, the answers that the community is desperately looking for. And I understand that where some people might say I already knew this, but this was just tip of the iceberg. And man, we got a lot of cool projects to work on and collaborate with. And yeah, this is just the beginning.
Yeah, and I think those numbers are, you all should get some credit for that, because if we had that data in 2018, I don't think it would have looked like that. That 6.7% at the 24-hour, 6 and change at the 24-hour, I'm pretty confident I can, would have been an 8-9 or a 9. So I think that's a big influence on behalf of all the work you guys have done, truly.
Well, before we let you go, Charles, I do want to make a crass commercial message for the ISSN. Remember, our conference is June 15 to 17, Fort Lauderdale Beach. The website is issn.net. That is issn.net. And also, if you are a new listener, hit the subscribe button, like the show, put only nice comments down there, tell everyone how great Charles is. And we would certainly appreciate that. And Charles, we hope to see you in Fort Lauderdale Beach. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. It has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Charles.
See you guys in June.
We'll talk soon.